He watched her bleed in silence for years. Now, he's coming to claim the wound. Harriet thought her biggest nightmare was standing center stage at her ex-boyfriend's wedding to her own cousin. She thought the hardest part would be the pitying stares of her family and the suffocating weight of betrayal. She was wrong. The real danger wasn't the man she lost. It was the man who had been watching her from the shadows of her own office. Shin, a Korean Mafia kingpin masquerading as a CEO, doesn't believe in moving on. He believes in scorched earth. He's seen her tears, he's tracked her every move, and now he's stepping out of the dark to become the most dangerous +1 Chicago has ever seen. At this wedding, there will be no peace. Only a cold, tattooed hand around her waist and a devotion that feels a lot like a cage. Are you ready to lose yourself in a world where love is a beautiful obsession? If you crave a romance that pushes boundaries, where the hero is a stoic, tattooed predator, and the chemistry is a slow-burn fuse leading to a massive explosion, then Shadow's Vow is the story you've been waiting for. Follow Harriet as she navigates the thin line between ruin and protection under the gaze of a man who refuses to let her go. Don't just watch the drama unfold, witness the obsession. If you love dark mafia romance, high-stakes betrayal, and a hero who would burn the world to keep his queen, click subscribe and dive into the shadows with Shin and Harriet today. The fluorescent lights of the 50th floor felt like a spotlight on Harriet's failure. Her phone buzzed again, a digital wedding invitation featuring her cousin's radiant smile and her ex's familiar eyes. Do you find the quarterly projections more interesting than our meeting, Miss Vance? The voice was a low vibration, coming from the speaker at the center of the mahogany table. The CEO's office was partitioned by smart-tinted glass. He remained a silhouette, a dark shape against the Chicago skyline. Harriet froze. She had worked for Shin for 3 years and had never seen his face. "No, sir. I apologize,"
No, sir.
Harriet whispered, her hands trembling as she flipped her phone face down. "Your heart rate says otherwise," the voice replied, cold and observational. "Focus. You are mine until 6 p.m. Back in her office, Harriet collapsed into her chair. The physical mail arrived an hour later, a thick, cream-colored envelope. Her mother called seconds later. "Harriet, you have to come. It's family. Don't let them see you're hurting." Harriet's grip tightened on the card until it crinkled. She didn't see the tiny, pin-sized camera lens embedded in the smoke detector above her. Miles away, in a room bathed in crimson light, Shin watched the feed. He saw the way she bit her lip to keep from crying. He saw the save the date card. He traced the outline of her face on a high-definition monitor, his hand covered in intricate black ink, dragons and lotus flowers that disappeared under his tailored sleeve. "They won't see you hurt, Harriet," he murmured to the empty room. "They will only see how much you've outgrown them." The next morning, Harriet was summoned to the top floor, not the boardroom, but the private residence. The doors slid open to an apartment that smelled of expensive sandalwood and cold rain. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window was a man. He was tall, his back to her, dressed in a black silk shirt that fought to contain his broad shoulders. "You're going to that wedding," he said. It wasn't a question. "How did you?" He turned. Harriet's breath hitched. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp, predatory features and eyes that seemed to see through her skin. He didn't smile. He stepped into her personal space, the scent of him overwhelming her senses. He reached out, his thumb brushing her jawline. "I'm going with you," he stated, "as your fiancé." "I can't lie to my family like that," Harriet stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "And I barely know you. You're my boss." Shin's hand moved from her jaw to the nape of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. The tattoos on his knuckles were a stark contrast to her skin. "I know everything about you, Harriet," he whispered, leaning down until his lips brushed her ear. "I know you take your coffee black. I know you sleep on the left side of the bed. I know the exact frequency of your sighs when you think no one is listening." He pulled back, his gaze intense. "I am not just your boss. I am the man who has kept you safe from the predators in this city. Now I'm the man who will help you break the people who broke your heart, but in return, you don't go back to that empty apartment. You stay here, with me." The reality of his words hit her. He had been stalking her. Every moment she thought she was alone, he was there. She should have been terrified, but the heat radiating from him was the first warmth she'd felt in months. "Why me?" she gasped. Shin didn't answer with words. He grabbed her hand, pressing it against his chest. Beneath the silk, his heart beat with a slow, terrifying rhythm. He guided her hand lower to the holster at his hip. "Because you are the only thing in this city that isn't for sale," he growled, "and I don't share what is mine." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a diamond the size of a thumbprint, pulsing with light. "Wear it. From this moment on, you are under the protection of the Kim Syndicate. If your ex even looks at you, I'll show him why they call me the ghost of Chicago." The transition happened overnight. Harriet's belongings were moved into Shin's penthouse before she could even protest. She felt like a bird in a cage made of glass and steel. Every morning, a new designer dress was laid out for her, always in shades that complemented her skin, always expensive enough to feed a family for a year. Shin was a ghost in his own home, appearing only in the periphery. He would watch her eat breakfast from the doorway, his arms crossed, the black ink on his forearms shimmering under the morning sun. He didn't speak, he just observed. "Is this part of the protection?" she asked, gesturing to the security detail at her door. "It's part of the ownership," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "Get used to it, Harriet." Before the wedding, Shin insisted on rehearsing their story. He sat her down in his private study, the walls lined with leather-bound books and monitors displaying live feeds of the city. "They will look for cracks," Shin said, circling her chair like a wolf. "They will try to make you feel small. You will lean into me. You will look at me as if I am your world." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "How do we meet?" "At a gala," Harriet whispered, her breath hitching as his gloved hand traced her collarbone. "And when did I realize I had to have you?" "The first time I spoke back to you in the boardroom." Shin's eyes darkened. "Good, now kiss me like you mean it, because at that wedding the world needs to believe I would kill for you." Her cousin, Alina, insisted on a pre-wedding dinner. It was a trap, a chance for the family to gloat. Harriet arrived at the high-end Chicago restaurant, her hand trembling. Then the black SUV pulled up. Shin stepped out, looking like a god of death in a charcoal suit. When he took Harriet's hand, the silence in the room was deafening. Her ex, Marcus, turned pale. He had spent years trying to get a meeting with a man like Shin. Now, that man was holding Harriet as if she were made of diamonds. "Is this your boyfriend?" Her mother stammered, eyes wide at the sight of Shin's tattooed knuckles. "Fiancé," Shin corrected, his voice slicing through the air. He pulled Harriet flush against his side. "And I suggest you address her with more respect. She's the future matriarch of my family." The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Shin didn't say much, but his presence was a suffocating weight. Marcus couldn't stop staring at Harriet, at the way she glowed, at the massive rock on her finger. Under the table, out of sight of the family, Shin's hand rested on Harriet's thigh. It wasn't a gentle touch. His thumb traced slow, possessive circles, moving higher with every boastful word Marcus spoke about his upcoming nuptials. Harriet tried to keep her face neutral, but the heat was unbearable. She realized then that Shin wasn't just doing this to help her. He was marking his territory. He wanted everyone, especially Marcus, to know that he had taken what they discarded and turned it into his most prized possession. Back at the penthouse, the adrenaline faded, leaving only the raw tension between them. Harriet turned to him in the foyer, her heart racing. "You went too far," she said. "The way you looked at Marcus, you looked like you wanted to end him." "I did," Shin said simply, unbuttoning his vest. "The fact that he ever touched you is an insult I have to live with. But don't mistake this for a game, Harriet." He pinned her against the door, his body a wall of heat. The lie ends the moment we leave that wedding, but the possession, that is permanent. You think you're going back to your old life after this. You're already gone. He leaned in, his lips hovering over hers. Tell me to stop, Harriet. Tell me you don't want the man who stalks your dreams. She didn't say a word. She pulled him closer. The morning of the wedding, Harriet found a box on her bed. It wasn't a bridesmaid's dress. It was a custom-made, floor-length gown in a shade of champagne that looked like liquid gold. White is for the pure, Shin's voice came from the balcony. He was cleaning a small, silver pocket knife, his eyes never leaving the street below. Gold is for the precious. Today, you will look like the woman who owns the man who owns the city. As Harriet dressed, she noticed the subtle weight of a silk garter he had insisted she wear. Hidden inside the lace was a small, sleek blade. A gift, he whispered, appearing behind her to zip the dress, in case I'm not close enough to bite. The cathedral was packed with Chicago's elite and Harriet's judgmental extended family. When the heavy oak doors opened, the organ music seemed to falter. Harriet didn't walk in like a discarded ex-girlfriend. She walked in like a queen. Shin was at her side, his presence so commanding that the groom, Marcus, actually stumbled during his vows. The whispers were frantic. Who is he? Is that Shin, the ghost? Shin ignored them all. He kept his hand firmly on the small of Harriet's back, his thumb tracing the spine of her dress. He wasn't looking at the altar. He was looking at her, his expression one of terrifying, silent worship. During the reception, Harriet found herself cornered by Marcus in the hallway. Harriet, wait, Marcus hissed, his eyes darting around. You can't be with him. Do you know who that is? People disappear around him. He's dangerous. And you were safe, Harriet countered, her voice steady for the first time in years. You're a coward, Marcus. He's a king. Marcus reached out to grab her arm, his face twisted in a mix of jealousy and regret. Before his fingers could touch her skin, a gloved hand clamped around his wrist. The sound of bone grinding against bone echoed in the quiet hall. Shin was there. He hadn't made a sound as he approached. I believe I told you, Shin said, his voice a lethal silk. She is no longer yours to touch. Shin didn't create a scene. He was too professional for that. Instead, he leaned in close to Marcus, whispering something that made the groom's face turn ashen. I've bought your debt, Marcus, Shin murmured. Your new marriage is already funded by my blood money. If you ever breathe the same air as Harriet again, I'll foreclose on your life. He let go of the wrist and turned to Harriet, his eyes softening just a fraction. He pulled a linen handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the spot on Harriet's arm where Marcus had almost touched her, as if cleaning a stain. The party is over, Shin decided. We're leaving. The ride back to the penthouse was silent and suffocating. The tension that had been building for weeks finally snapped. The moment the elevator doors closed, Shin didn't wait. He pinned Harriet against the mirrored wall, his hands framing her head. You looked at him, Shin growled, his composure finally cracking. Even if it was with hate, you looked at him. I was saying goodbye, Shin, Harriet cried out, her chest heaving. Why do you care so much? You have everything, why me? Shin's hard exterior shattered. He grabbed her hands, pressing them against his face, forcing her to feel the heat of his skin. Because when I was a shadow, you were the only light I followed. I didn't choose you today, Harriet. I chose you years ago, and I will burn this city to the ground before I let you walk out that door. He kissed her then, a desperate, possessive claim that tasted of salt and obsession. While Shin was away on business, which Harriet now knew meant the violent management of Chicago's docks, she found it, a keypad hidden behind a painting in his study. Using his birth date, she entered. The room was a temple of surveillance. Wall-to-wall monitors displayed her apartment, her favorite cafe, and her office desk from angles she never knew existed. There were photos of her from 3 years ago, at the grocery store, at the park, crying on a bench after the breakup. He hadn't just been her boss. He had been her silent architect, manipulating her career and her safety from the dark. She wasn't an employee. She was his masterpiece. Harriet didn't run. She stood in the center of the room, paralyzed by the sheer scale of his devotion. When the door opened, Shin was there, his knuckles bruised and his shirt stained with someone else's blood. He didn't look ashamed, he looked relieved. "Now you see," he said, his voice raspy. He walked toward her, pulling a small object from his pocket, a hair tie she had lost months ago. He placed it on a velvet display case. "Every piece of you I could find, I kept. I am a monster, Harriet, but I am your monster." The confrontation was interrupted by a frantic call from Harriet's mother. The wedding had ended in disaster. Marcus's business had been seized and Alina was hysterical. But the real shock came next. Harriet, the men who took the assets. They said they were collecting on a debt your father owed. Harriet turned to Shin, her eyes wide. "My father died years ago." "He died owing the syndicate," Shin said calmly, stepping closer to wipe a smudge of dust from her cheek. "I didn't just find you by accident, Harriet. I was sent to collect you as payment. But the moment I saw you, I decided to pay the debt myself, so I could keep you for a different reason." Harriet realized the depth of the trap. Her entire life, her job, her promotion, her chance encounter with Shin had been orchestrated. She was the collateral for a dead man's sins. "Am I a prisoner?" she whispered, the gold dress feeling like a shroud. Shin grabbed her waist, pulling her so close their heartbeats merged. "You are the only person in this world who can tell me no. If you want to leave, the door is open. But know this, the moment you walk out, the syndicate comes for your mother. Stay, and you are a queen. Leave, and you are a fugitive." The psychological weight of his words pushed Harriet to the edge. She looked at the monitors, at the girl who had been so lonely, and then at the man who would kill the world to keep her warm. She reached out, tracing the tattoos on his hands. "You're a stalker, a liar, a killer." "I am," he whispered against her neck, his hand sliding down to the silk garter he'd given her. "Then stop watching me through a screen," she challenged, her voice breaking. "If I'm yours, then claim what you paid for." Shin didn't hesitate. He lifted her onto the desk, sweeping the surveillance equipment aside. In the glow of the monitors displaying her past, he began to write her future on her skin. The syndicate was not a democracy, but it was a business, and the elders didn't like distractions. Shin's obsession with Harriet had made him vulnerable. Word leaked that he had wiped her father's debt with his own blood, and the high-ranking captain saw it as a weakness. While Harriet and Shin were encased in the silence of the penthouse, the elevators were overridden. The glass walls that once offered a view of Chicago now felt like a target. "Stay in the panic room," Shin commanded, checking the magazine of his pistol. "No," Harriet said, her eyes flashing. "You told me I was the matriarch. A queen doesn't hide while her kingdom burns." The intruders weren't just random thugs. They were led by Marcus. Desperate and broke, Harriet's ex had sold his soul to the syndicate elders to get his life back. He burst into the living area, flanked by armed men. "He's a monster, Harriet," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking. "He's been tracking you since you were 22. He's not a lover, he's a predator." Shin stood in front of Harriet, a silent wall of tattooed muscle. "A predator protects his own," Shin said softly, "something you wouldn't understand." The room erupted into chaos. Shin moved like a shadow, a blur of violence and precision. But Marcus, fueled by a coward's rage, lunged for Harriet while Shin was occupied with two captains. Marcus tackled her, his hands bruising her throat. "If I can't have my life back, you don't get yours." Harriet didn't scream. She remembered the weight on her thigh. She reached under her gold skirt, fingers finding the lace garter and the cold steel of the blade Shin had gifted her. With a sharp, practiced motion, she drove the blade into Marcus's shoulder. As he fell back, gasping, Shin appeared behind him. He didn't use a gun. He used his bare, tattooed hands to ensure Marcus would never speak again. The floors were stained, and the silence that followed was heavy with the scent of ozone and iron. Shin turned to Harriet, expecting her to look at him with horror. Instead, she was standing tall, the small blade still in her hand, her breathing ragged but her gaze fixed on him. He walked over and knelt at her feet, ignoring the chaos around them. He took her hand, the one holding the knife, and pressed it to his heart. "You're stained because of me," he whispered, his forehead resting against her knee. "I have ruined your soul, Harriet." "You didn't ruin it," she replied, dropping the blade and tangling her fingers in his dark hair. "You just stopped pretending it wasn't already dark." A month later, the Chicago skyline looked different. The elders who opposed Shin were gone, replaced by those who understood that Harriet was his only law. They sat on the balcony of a new, even more secure fortress. Shin sat behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. He no longer needed the monitors. She was right where he could feel her heart beat. "Are you happy, my queen?" he asked, his voice a low, possessive purr. Harriet looked out at the city. She was no longer the girl crying in a Zoom meeting or the woman mourning a betrayal. She was the most powerful woman in the city, held by a man who would never let her fall and never let her go. "I'm yours," she whispered. Shin kissed the mark he'd left on her neck. "Always." In the city of shadows, the brightest flame is the one that burns in a cage. Harriet and Shin's journey ends not with a goodbye, but with a permanent surrender. In the underworld of Chicago, love isn't a soft thing. It's a debt paid in blood, a vow etched in ink, and a devotion that refuses to blink. Harriet walked into the lion's den to escape her past, only to find that the lion had been her guardian all along. She traded a life of quiet betrayal for a life of dangerous protection, proving that sometimes the monster who stalks you is the only one who truly sees you. If you felt the heat of the Kim Syndicate, if the tension between Harriet and Shin left you breathless, and if you find yourself looking into the shadows wondering who might be watching back, then you've just experienced the power of a true stalker mafia romance. Did Shin's possessiveness thrill you? Did Harriet's transformation into a mafia queen inspire you? Are you craving more stories where the bad guy is only good for her? Stay in the shadows. The story doesn't have to end here. Whether it's a new obsession or a deeper dive into the world of the Kim Syndicate, the dark is always waiting. Thank you for witnessing the rise of Harriet and the reign of Shin. Remember, in this world, love is possession, and there is no escape. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more addictive stories that will keep you glued to your screen.